Hey, welcome to Inspirational Focus. I'm Patrick Dangle. Next to me is Mike Thompson. And we have in our Inspirational Focus program Pastor Jeremy Hollingshead, who's the pastor with the Lutheran Church in Jackson, Ohio, Faith Lutheran.
Yes, thank you, Patrick.
And we had the opportunity to talk, Mike, about some of the upcoming traditional Christmas traditions that we have. And I find it interesting that the whole realm of the Christian faith that is based on the birth of Christ has a tremendous amount of different stories and history and background.
And different cultures have different ways of celebrating and stuff. Would you say that Christmas is the #1 holiday, or Easter would be the #1 holiday?
Well, by number one, you have to talk about whether you mean most celebrated or most important.
Because me, Easter would be, because that was a miracle. I mean, yeah, there's a miracle in the birth, but that's not
Well, the miracle
the
in
thing.
birth might be the incarnation, the fact that, God has come to earth in human form, right? So like fully human, fully divine, if that's your particular theology, which for a lot of Christianity it is.
Right.
So you have the two natures of Christ. God, this eternal being, has taken on human bounds for the purpose of saving humanity. So that's a miracle as well. But we don't have the proof that the first miracle kind of happened until the second miracle at Easter happens. So Christmas is the most celebrated because a lot of folks who are not Christians still celebrate Easter. I mean, still celebrate Christmas, right?
Right.
I mean, people exchange gifts, they have the dinner, folks maybe now they have solstice parties instead of Christmas parties like they used to before there were Christmas parties. But really, people celebrate a lot of Christmas stuff whether they're faithful or not.
Right. I just think Easter gets a little shortchanged.
Easter does get shortchanged, and it's the one where the resurrection happens, right? And so it's the one that kind of validates everything we celebrate with the first festival. So which one is... They're both really, really important, but as a pastor, if I have to talk about which one's more important, I'm going to say it's the resurrection.
Right.
Right?
Because not everybody does that.
The ball game has changed.
Right.
The world has changed forever.
Right.
Like in a more even impactful way than at Christmas. So for me, which ones make more? They're both really important. But if I had to pick one that's more important, that somebody forced me to admit, I'm going to say Easter. Right. Which one is most celebrated? That's going to be Christmas. More people celebrate Christmas than Easter.
So let's talk about why do we celebrate Christmas and maybe why we celebrate it now.
Okay, so we celebrate Christmas because it's a time that we have as over the centuries as church. We want to celebrate the birth of Christ. Now, a lot of people are like, "Happy birthday, Jesus." It's important to know that this is one of 365 and a quarter days that could be Jesus' birthday. It is probably not.
Yeah, I think it was scientifically proven not.
Yeah. So this is probably 99% sure not Jesus' birthday.
Right.
So when we say happy birthday, Jesus, we're pretty wrong. So we talk about like, he's the only one not getting a present, and it's his birthday. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. It's not. I understand your outrage. I understand why you're upset. But it's not Jesus' birthday. Let's get that right. So it is the day that we commemorate or celebrate the birth of Christ. Well, why do we do it at this time of year? It's dark all the time. It's cold. I mean, it's terrible, right? Well, there were all these solstice festivals because the shortest day of the year, if that was the day you had to do the least amount of work, you had the least amount of sunshine. And so let's have a party, right? And so culturally, in a lot of places, they had that solstice party. And as Christianity was not always the dominant religion, right? I mean, for us it maybe has been, but there was a time that it wasn't.
It was an up-and-comer.
It was a few thousand followers in Judea, like kind of thing, or in Galilee. So as it starts to spread, and people are starting to convert because of the missionary journeys of the Apostle Paul, and you had St. Thomas going towards India and all these different things, and people start to convert to this faith. A lot of folks are polytheistic, so they venerate the Roman gods, which are very similar to the Greek gods, and so in places they're still venerating those. Well, there are these festivals that happen at the solstice, and all these different kinds of faith groups. And so what Christianity was finding was people would be Christian 364 days a year, but on those festivals they'd still go and partake in the pagan festivals because they were fun or whatever. And so it's like, what can we do to make sure that people are not reverting back and like worshiping these idols or false gods at these really important times of year? And it's like, well, why don't we celebrate saints or Christ or these other kind of things at that time that we need to celebrate, and then that way it'll coincide with the timetable, and people don't then have to go and do these pagan practices.
Because pine trees were around when Jesus was born, right?
Right. Yeah. There were, well, not
decorated
in the
pine
immediate
trees.
vicinity. Well, that's a different. That's a good story. That's a fun story. I don't remember the exact same. We can do that in a second. But so yes, Christmas is celebrating when it is because that's when all the solstice festivals and parties were. And Christianity was pragmatic, man. It's this idea of,
how are we going to spread the word?
how are we going to spread the word? How are we going to keep people from reverting back to what they were before? Well, everyone's leaving during this pagan festival. Why not celebrate the birth of Christ at this time? It's as good a time as any. We don't know his birthday anymore.
Right.
Let's celebrate it now. And then we make it about Jesus. And, you know, why do we have Christmas gifts? Well, we have the wise man. But they don't show up till he's like 2 years old. And, you know, so when you see the wise men in the nativity, you're like, I just kind of cringe. But it happens. It makes people feel good. I understand it, but it's not necessarily the most accurate. So if your wise men are in your nativity, you don't have to feel bad. You like it that way. It's good enough. But it's maybe not what happened. Just like maybe it didn't happen in December. But pragmatically for the church, it's what really worked so that, you know, the faithful could stay strong and stay faithful. So that's why we have it when we do. Now, to get to your story of the Christmas tree, this is German, I believe. And so there's I don't remember the saint's name, but there was this deal where they did a sacrifice every year on this giant ancient oak tree. And it was a human sacrifice.
How were they they hang somebody?
Yeah, I think I don't remember, I don't know how they killed them, but they killed them at this oak tree.
All right.
And so this saint goes out and chops down this tree before they can kill somebody at this ancient oak. Now, we might talk about the travesty of killing an ancient, beautiful, wonderful tree, but dude's trying to stop
if it
human
saves
sacrifice,
some lives.
so we get it. And immediately after the tree is felled, this giant fir tree, like our Christmas tree, sprouts in its place, showing like this new hope or this new life or whatever. So this is the legend.
Okay.
And so this is where, you know, we get like the Christmas tree maybe is from this legend. And it makes sense that it's German because what's the country that has the song about Christmas trees? Germany. It's O Tannenbaum, right?
Right.
O Christmas tree, O Christmas tree. Well, of course they have it. It's their story.
What year would this?
I don't even know. I just know the legend. I don't know, and I
wasn't sure if it was
particulars of the legend super well, but
closer to the Jesus time or closer to now.
No, it's going to be in between there.
Okay.
Right? It's going to be in that
like Middle Ages.
It's going to be in the low Middle Ages when a lot of that transition is happening, and a lot of those festivals are getting set, and people are Christianity's spreading all over the world. It's causing a lot of excitement. And there is conflict at this time. So as Christianity spreads and grows, that means something else is waning. And I think we see in this country, when it feels like something is waning, people get real protective of it, right?
Sure.
You know, and so it's, you know, there are these battles and hardships and you know, who can get the upper hand and how can it work. And so there's always conflict, but sometimes you get really great stories out of that. Like this, you know, the saint that cuts down the ancient oak to stop the human sacrifice, and in its place we all have Christmas trees in our house now. So
just out of curiosity, when did we start switching to a full understanding of Christ's birth to Santa Claus?
Okay, so there is a St. Nicholas of Myra, and he was a bishop. He wasn't just like a regular everyday pastor walking down the street like me. He was a bishop. He had the mitre, you know, the big staff and all this stuff.
Yeah, in Germany, he still dresses with that.
Yeah, yeah. And so and people are like, well, how does St. Nicholas turn into Santa Claus? Well, what's the German name for St. Nicholas? It's Sinterklaas. So that sounds like Santa Claus, right? I mean, that makes sense. And so we have Sinterklaas, who is a bishop in the early part of the 4th century. So in the early 300s.
Around Constantine's.
He's exactly kind of coincides with Constantine, but he is around as bishop before Constantine becomes emperor. St. Nicholas is actually in jail for a little while under Emperor Diocletian II during his persecution, and is only let out of jail after Constantine assumes power. So Constantine essentially makes it possible for Santa Claus to get out of jail.
Well, you're not a saint without hardship.
You're not usually, not usually. And so people are like, well, how does he end up being the dude who gives out gifts? Well, there's this story of this man who's, so Santa Claus, people, where does he live? He lives in the North Pole. Well, original Santa Claus, St. Nicholas lives in Asia Minor, which is modern day Turkey. So, he probably had some shish kebabs. So, like, this idea of Santa Claus being in this really cold place with the big coat and the mittens and everything, I'm sure it gets kind of cold in Turkey from time to time, but it's not like there are reindeer there. So, St. Nicholas had a big move when he went from Asia Minor to the North Pole. So, he's actually Bishop of Myra, and he has this really interesting life, and he's this person of God, and there's a man in his town who used to be wealthy, who has lost his fortune. And he has these 3 daughters, and he has all these debts. And as we know, in the early part of modern time, it was much like it was in antiquity. Human beings were commodities. And so if you had debts, people would definitely take your children as to pay off your debt and use them as slaves. So he has these 3 daughters who are all of age, so they're going to be made prostitutes. And it's terrible. It's this guy that lives in Nicholas' town. Nicholas, from his parents, before he was a bishop, inherited a good little bit of wealth. And why is it that he's the guy that we associate with giving gifts is he redistributed his parents' wealth to the poor. But one person he particularly took care of was this man who, against his will, was going to have his daughters end up being prostitutes. And so what happened then is, because gold's heavy, he climbs up on the roof, and he's going to lower this gold into the house. But he can't do it all in one night because it's too heavy. He's got to climb up on the roof. And so he lowers it down the one night, and the guy wakes up, and he finds enough money to barter his daughter, or to pay his daughter out of having to be a prostitute. And then the second night, the same thing happens, and the gold shows up, and now he knows that 2 of his daughters are saved. Well, on the 3rd night, the guy does what no child should ever do. He stays up to try to see Santa Claus.
Oh.
He stays up to try to see where this money is coming from. And when the money lowers down, he knew it was Nicholas because he was famous for doing these acts for the poor. And so this man, his daughters didn't go into prostitution because of St. Nicholas of Myra. And that's where, and he's on the roof, and he's lowering the presents down. So does that sound like anything we know? Right? So there's truth to the legend, and sometimes the stories in the legend are better than the stories that come later. And so he really was a really giving guy. He didn't really think about himself. He gave away his entire fortune to help people that were far less fortunate than he was. He was a bishop. He was not going to miss a meal. He was not going to have a hard day necessarily, other than being in jail. He was going to have enough to get by on. And so he took his wealth and he gave it to people who needed it more than he did. And this was just like probably the most generous, biggest act, and it's the one that has lasted through history without being adapted too awful much, unlike some of the other ones.
He probably wasn't as heavy, having to climb up on somebody's roof.
Make it up on the roof,
I would imagine that as the story was told and retold, first of all, there wasn't printing presses, there wasn't the internet, there wasn't, it was all word of mouth. As the stories went through the different countries, and it was changed into those languages, etc.
Embellishment here and there.
Yeah, and I would also imagine that some of the customs of celebrating that sort of commingled Christ's birth with Santa Claus.
Well, and it might have been at the same time of year, but those things happen. And so what we have also with St. Nicholas is he was an important figure, and he was well known. He was a bishop, and he was alive through a lot of Constantine's reign. And people theorize, and he is on some of the lists, the historical lists, as being part of the First Ecumenical Council at Nicaea, which is important to note because this is when the theology of Bishop Arius, or not bishop, he was a presbyter, he wasn't a bishop, I apologize. Presbyter Arius of Alexandria, who questioned the divinity of Christ, he said Christ was God's greatest creation, not divine, was having it out with the folks who were Trinitarian theologians who thought, you know, Christ was divine and there was the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And St. Nicholas is reported to be a proponent of the Trinity and became so kind of inflamed and impassioned about this support of Christ as divine that a particular Arian supporter maybe got a little too mouthy with him or something, and St. Nicholas is, this is a story, this may not be true, is reported to have punched him in the face at the First Council of Nicaea. Now that may not have happened, but it also may have. And so a lot of times churches get down on Santa Claus and they like try to talk about, you know, well, Santa Claus is not real, or they talk about like, well, you shouldn't be talking about Santa Claus to your kids. And I'm just kind of like, you know,
Jesus is the reason for the season.
Jesus is the reason for the season. And you know who would agree with that most? Santa Claus.
Right.
Yeah.
All right? I mean, he loves Jesus so much that if someone says Jesus is not the Son of God, he punches him in the face.
He's throwing down.
He's throwing down.
Or he gives him a lump of coal.
Right. Well, there's that. But not that you needed so much coal in Asia Minor at that time. I don't know. But
that may come along with Krampus or something.
yeah, I think Krampus, some of the Krampus things, who's a
Krampus.
German, is a German folk, I don't want to say folk tale, but it's folk stories.
Myths.
And so Krampus punishes bad children.
Oh, I see.
And you leave him sweets to try to pay him off.
I see.
Right? And if you were really, really bad, no sweets in the world would save you, and Krampus would steal you and take you away.
Oh, that's interesting. So milk and cookies, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and so like some of the Krampus things, like the sweets and stuff like that, or the you're going to get a lump of coal, or you better not shout, you better not pout, you better shout, better not cry, better not pout and tell me
That's
why.
interesting.
You know, like those kind of ideas probably come from Krampus being commingled with Sinterklaas. So that happened. But a lot of times, I feel like, at least not maybe in my church, but in churches as being a pastor, people form reactions to things, and maybe they're not always so great. You know, like there are times that maybe we can rebel against society and say, this is just wrong. Like if people are really, really greedy or, you know, really, really selfish, we can say, this is just wrong. I'm not sure.
I just don't like all the marketing and the sales and all that stuff
either. But I'm not sure that we have to like be mean to our kids because of our beliefs, right? Like, I'm not saying that belief in Santa Claus is wonderful for children, but like I kind of believe in Santa Claus. At least like I know who St. Nicholas is, and I know that there's this wonderful spirit and a lot of happy feelings and good things that come out of this particular person and this character in history and this legend. And so I kind of really revere it, and I think that as a Christian you can, because he was a Christian, right? Like why
He's
do
a saint.
Why do you gotta vilify your guy? This is a dude that punches someone in the face for saying Jesus is not God. I mean, this is a guy that gets thrown in jail, just like Paul and Silas, for his belief and for his faith. And at no point during his incarceration, which is awful, it's Roman incarceration, during no point during any of this does he renounce his faith. Does he say anything other than Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and that's in whom I have my belief? Santa Claus is a hero of the church, right? And so I think that's something we really can talk about instead of saying, you shouldn't have your children believe in Santa. I'm like, yeah, they should totally believe in Santa Claus. Maybe you just need to talk about him differently. Maybe how you market Santa matters. Because he was on the roof dropping down presents to keep people out of horrible situations. He did care about people who were in need. He did love Jesus so much he went to jail and punched somebody in the face. I mean, maybe he didn't punch somebody in the face. That could be a legend.
Yeah.
He did go to jail. You know, I still tell the kids in church the story of him getting punched in the face because it's fun.
Yeah.
Like, or him punch somebody. I'm like, did you know that even Santa was on the naughty list once? And they were like, no. So.
Yeah, I know that St. Nicholas, I think, is the 12th. I'm not sure. In the Catholic Church, they commemorate different saints.
I believe that's correct.
And so consequently, the 12th and the 25th, they sort of commingle. And
but if you're all out of presents on that day, you can punch someone in the face.
But it is interesting. We celebrate in the United States where we give presents or things either late in the evening on the eve or during the day at the beginning.
Or
and
both.
and
Well, you know, with today's families, you got to do.
You go to one family's on one day,
Right.
and the other family on the other one.
yeah, that's true. And in other countries, they don't have necessarily the gift giving as we in America do.
Well, no, sometimes, ours is pretty over the top.
Yeah.
It's pretty consumerist in
Yeah.
some ways. I can't imagine anybody else in the world other than an American getting a car for Christmas. You know, you see all those holiday events with a car with a
Oh,
car.
yeah.
I'm like,
Oh,
who in the
yeah.
world is doing that?
Yeah, I never
It's a
seen one.
Lexus for Christmas. I ain't seen it in Southeast Ohio. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
But anyway, so there are places where the gifts are a lot more. They're not as many, and there are things that are just kind of like treats.
You might get an apple and some oranges or whatever.
Some candy, maybe.
Right.
Like some places. You know, we have stockings in America, but that's not the only presents we get.
Right.
Like that's where you get all your candy, and then you get presents on top of that. It's like presents on top of presents on top of presents.
Right.
And from everyone you know and have ever met in your life, apparently, it's crazy these days.
Well, in there a country that they put shoes out?
They put the shoes out, and they put like some straw in the shoes, and then and then the
It would be
shoes
like
get
Holland or
presents.
something with the.
No, I think it's in Asia.
Okay.
But there are all kinds of different traditions. We do have the stockings in a lot of different countries, but America is pretty grandiose in its gift giving. I wouldn't say that we're generous, but we are grandiose, right? Because
Yeah.
we expect something back too, right? And in other countries, it's not nearly so commercial necessarily.
Right.
Especially, you know, in poorer countries, you know, you're going to have your big Christmas meal, and so sometimes it's really just about that time of the meal with the family, and that's where the extra finances go. And sometimes there are holidays that are close to Christmas. You know, I know in Haiti, their like July 4th, their Day of Independence, is New Year's Day. That's when the revolt happened, was New Year's Day.
Huh.
So they got like Christmas, and then like on New Year's Day they got like two holidays. They've got their independence and it's the New Year. So and then they all eat pumpkin soup because they
Pumpkin
weren't
soup.
allowed to eat pumpkin soup when they were occupied by France. So as soon as they kicked them out, they made pumpkin soup.
Huh.
So
Wow.
on Independence Day, they ate
I didn't think that was
soup.
so much of a treat, but okay.
Well, you know, when someone tells you you can't have something, you want it.
Oh yeah.
And so during that time,
I
there's all
don't
kinds of
want a
interesting
Lexus.
holidays. No.
Yeah.
I don't want it.
Well, I think as I get older, I always try to tell my mom, you know, can you not buy so many presents? I mean, y'all need it more than I do. Come on. I mean, we want to give you something, and I know that you want to give us something too, but can we pare this down so there's not so much pressure on you or other folks? And
We have in the past 10, 15 years.
And so hopefully that when you have younger kids, sometimes it seems hard.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you know, as people age, you know, you hopefully can be responsible and say, you know, let's dial this back and really think about why we're here and what we're doing. And you know, people say, well, Christmas is about family. I'm like, no, that's idolatry. Christmas is still about we're celebrating the birth of Christ, even though it's not his birthday.
Right.
We're celebrating the birth of Christ, and so like as a family, we get together and that's what we do. We celebrate the birth of Christ. But
Well, don't you find in America Thanksgiving Day now is becoming a celebrated family day?
Yeah.
And it used to be Christmas, but
I thought we were just eating well so we can go out on Black Friday.
well,
So
Thanksgiving is like the prep. It's like the pregame warm up for
Right.
Christmas. You know, you have your meal on Thanksgiving. In my family, we have the same meal twice.
Yeah.
We just do a better job at Christmas because we had practice a month ago.
well, with Christmas though, I've known from my own personal experience that it's if you have smaller children, it's run. This grandparent, that
Oh, yeah.
grandparent, things of that nature, and so it's a lot different than in Thanksgiving where you can really sit down and enjoy the meal.
Right.
But you know, I think that Thanksgiving is replacing that family time.
Yeah, because people really don't like meet for too awful long. Seems like at Christmas, a lot of times it's like, you got like a couple hours
Yep.
at this place,
That's
a couple
right.
hours at
Yep.
this place. Whereas on Thanksgiving, you kind of really do spend the whole day
Yeah.
together,
Yes.
watch football or whatever.
Yeah,
Right.
watching certain teams beat certain teams up north.
You're watching.
That's 2 days after. My birthday is always very close to the game.
Uh-huh.
And I feel like, Urban Meyer or God or whoever else in the world gives me a present when the Buckeyes win. And, on the years that they don't, which is not very often these days, they forgot my birthday. So,
So this is recorded in Ohio, and the game they talk about is Ohio and Michigan.
Ohio State.
Right. I'm not a sports guy.
But I always feel like they all forgot my birthday whenever they
Well, I'm sorry to hear.
That's all right.
But Rose Bowl's in the.
Yeah.
But anyway, as we're talking about the traditions, we're coming to the end. Any significant tradition that you find that we haven't discussed that you find interesting?
Well, so the season that directly precedes Christmas is Advent. It's the 4 weeks before Christmas. And people are all like, really kind of want to skip it, right? They just want to sing Christmas songs, and they want to, just be Christmas.
I used to get Advent calendars from my relatives in Germany.
Yeah.
And so, but the thing is, with Advent, we really look for the return of Christ. And if we skip that and just focus on the birth, it kind of makes Christ a regular guy. And
That's a good point.
That's
a good point.
Christ can't be a regular guy.
Mm-hmm.
We really do need that time to focus on his return. Now, I don't go so far as to be like it was in the old days, where you stare at your shoes and like, am I worthy of Christ returning? That kind of doesn't matter in a way, because he's coming back either way.
Yeah.
And the world's going to be forever changed, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And so we don't need to worry. We just need to live into that a little bit. Christmas is on the way. We'll celebrate the birth of Christ. We'll have the baby in the nativity soon. But sometimes it's always good to think about the world to come being better than this one, and the work we have to do in this one to help that happen sooner maybe.
Good points of wisdom.
It's something I guess I haven't really thought about, but it's a nice distinction to say this is not Christ's birthday. We are just celebrating the birth of Christ, not saying that this is the day. Mm-hmm. I think that was kind of an important thing to distinction to make.
That sounds good. Hey, we're with Pastor Jeremy Hollingshead. He's the Lutheran pastor with the Faith Lutheran Church in Jackson, Ohio. You'll find his contact information below on the information if you ever want to touch bases with Pastor Jeremy. I'm Patrick Dangle. I want to thank you for listening.
Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.